Welcome to Pathways, a career podcast from the Idaho State University Career Center. I'm your host, Mark Beaver. Today, we're talking with Dr. Erika Fulton, Assistant Professor of Psychology at Idaho State University. Erika works in the fascinating realm of metacognition, though she was actually in another career for almost a decade before she even decided to go back to graduate school to pursue the position she's now in. Settle in and listen to the journey that Erika went on. Hey Erika, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So, psychology is a pretty broad topic. It's one of those ones that you often hear when someone says I'm majoring in psychology. The next question is, what are you going to do with that?
Yep.
As a professor of psychology and someone who's doing something with it, can you tell us a little bit more about your job, kind of like both a snapshot and kind of a bird's eye view of some of the stuff you do?
Sure. So I'm a professor, and I'm at an institution, ISU, obviously, where I have quite a range of responsibilities. I teach, I do research, and then I do all kinds of administrative things. The teaching means I get to teach freshmen, sophomore, all ages, all different subjects. And the research, I have a lab. A lot of people don't realize that in psychology, we actually have a lab. They think that that's in the hard sciences. Ours looks different. We just usually have computers and not petri dishes or anything like that. So yeah, I manage a lab and we do all kinds of research studies.
Awesome. What are some of your research areas?
So my main one is metacognition, which means thinking about thinking. I specifically study how well we judge the accuracy of our memory. So this is a problem, right? If you're overconfident in your memory, you might not prepare well enough for an exam, or you might spread misinformation, right? So if you read a news article and you think you remember it really well, you might then go tell people what it said. And most people don't fact check that, right? So you're just spreading misinformation that way. So we know that most people are overconfident, and we're trying to figure out how we can reduce that overconfidence.
Wow. Is that been carried through, that kind of research interest, or is that something more recent?
That has been since my master's program. So I've done that in graduate school and have done that since graduating and my whole time at Idaho State. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. You have me kind of thinking about what I'm thinking about a little too much now all of a sudden. And I hope I don't get ahead of myself. Or
you will need
myself.
therapy by the end of this.
So I guess you said something interesting there that I think a lot of folks might not really think about when getting into psychology, is that there is a lot of research involved. Is it psychology across the board kind of research dependent, or are there certain tracks that are less so?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, there are different tracks for sure. Some people will use their bachelor's in psychology just in business. They might go into human resources, marketing, product development, survey design. Other people will go a very clinical route where they will study how to provide different forms of therapy. And that can involve some research, but doesn't have to. So we actually even then have tracks within clinical where you can just do clinical work, learn how to work directly with people, or do research, or both. And then the track that I went on is really more like basic science. So if you think about, a biologist who's studying genetics or something, that's like what I do. I do psychological science for the sake of science, just trying to understand how the mind works. Right. And I have zero training in helping people. So just a basic scientist, really.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting, though, because we need that science that you're providing to help provide the training to the psychologists who are helping people.
Yeah. And so there are people who do that, who will, you can think of it more like applied science. So I could study the mind as it relates to a mental disorder, right? And then that can inform clinicians. But we also do much more basic science than that, where, we're just trying to understand how the mind works, and we're not always sure exactly how we're going to use that information. It can maybe be used in different ways. For us, I mean, maybe it's obvious that when you study metacognition, a lot of the applications are in education, right? And so it's not clinical, right? It's not about therapy, but it's how can we improve our education systems? What advice can we give to students about how to judge their memory better so that they're better prepared for exams? But I might not be studying students in a classroom when I do that. I might be doing something in the lab with, very controlled variables, but ultimately it can lead to those applications.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how, I guess for like folks who are interested in psychology, they come into university, they're asked to pick a major, they find psychology very interesting. Do you find that many of them kind of understand all these different tracks, or is this something that really happens in those early years of their major?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to answer sort of the last part first, I don't think we do a great job of educating them about those tracks. So in the first class, Introduction to Psychology, we're really just throwing a bunch of facts and science and classic studies at them to give them an overview of the types of things that we study, but we don't always tell them about how you can use a degree in psychology to do many different career paths.
Yeah. I think, speaking for myself, it was a general ed requirement when I was an undergrad. And I remember taking that class and just finding it extremely interesting, like just the learning for the sake of learning kind of aspect of it. But definitely the not knowing some possible applications of it, like in a career sense, it made it really like a non-starter for myself.
Yeah, because when, if you're in college and you're thinking more about how I can use this degree or how can I make money, psychology is not the one that gives you obvious answers to that. I think part of the problem, though, with psychology is you're somewhat limited in what you can do with just the bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why a lot of people feel like it's also a non-starter. Yeah. Like I said, you can get a job, and sometimes it's not just a job, it's a career, but it might be, human resources, marketing, which are great careers. But if you want to do something other than those, then you probably do need a master's, sometimes a PhD. Yeah. But there's a lot of different kinds of masters that you can get that are psychology related. And we probably need to do more general education about that. Like a master's in social work, is something you can do having a degree, a bachelor's degree in psychology. And people don't think of that because it's the word social work and not psychology.
Right. Yeah. But there's a lot of things in there that you were even talking about earlier that are directly applied to theories of social work or even social science, kind of at like a more research level as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a good foundation. It's like a nice foundational major, I guess, for a lot of different pathways.
Yeah, totally. And that's often what people tell me they like about the course is they can see applications to their day-to-day life, whether it's with friends and family or, some sales job that they have that they're not going to have forever. Mm-hmm. There are things that they can use immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess going back to your actual job here, what's your favorite part of this job? What gives you the most satisfaction on like a day-to-day?
Yeah, I think to some extent that has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Not in any major way, but right now what I'm really enjoying is all the different projects I have going on in my lab and the ones that I'm collaborating with students on. It's really fun to work with both undergraduate and graduate students at different levels or different stages in the research process. So, undergraduates who've never heard of metacognition and starting to see all those connections, they're like, oh, I see, how that's relevant here and there. More advanced undergraduate students developing their own study, and it's really fun to teach them how to do research. Yeah. And then with my graduate students, that's really cool because they slowly become colleagues rather than students, because, they finally get to the point where they have enough knowledge and skills that we can really, feed off each other with cool ideas and ideas for new studies and writing better manuscripts. So I'm really enjoying that. And definitely still like teaching in the classroom. I've just been doing that longer. And it's been tough during the pandemic. You know,
Sure.
everyone's energy just isn't what, so it's a little less rewarding because we can't quite teach the way we really want to teach right now.
For certain. Well, yeah, hopefully we get that. Hopefully that gets back to some kind of new normal that's a little more sustainable.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got to be pretty satisfying to see that, to be part of that evolution with some of those grad students. And also introducing the idea of metacognition. There's got to be like aha moments, just like fireworks.
Yeah. And being able to say like, okay, what we're doing right now, that's metacognition. As we talk about doing research on metacognition. So it's kind of this
very meta.
It's all very meta and, multiple levels. And I just want to say that the name of my lab is Meta, and I had that before Facebook switched to Meta. So
thank you for pointing that out.
Just in case you Google that.
So we often talk on this program about, kind of how the job you have can influence the rest of your life outside of your job. So as this specific job applies, and I think maybe having already talked about some of those different tracks that you could have possibly taken in psychology, what do you love about this job that it provides you in your life outside of this job?
Gosh, that's a really loaded question. So this might be too personal, but one of the things is that I don't have children of my own, and I won't be having children of my own. And so I'll admit that teaching and mentorship fulfills kind of that need or desire that wouldn't necessarily be filled otherwise. And, we talk about in psychology, theories about that, the need as we get older to feel like we're passing on, not just genes from an evolutionary perspective, but we're passing on knowledge or, so it's this generativity stage of Erikson's theory. And so I didn't go into this profession for that reason, but that was kind of a side effect benefit. Being part of a community, right? I mean, that's one of the advantages of working at a university and working with so many students as well as your faculty and staff colleagues. I feel, especially in a smaller town, a town that's very different from where I grew up or where I've spent most of my life, it's really important to have that community.
Yeah. That has come up also on this show a couple times, like.
So my answers aren't original is what you're saying?
No, sorry. That's not what I was saying. I'm saying that, we hit on, there's a lot of common themes that people find fulfillment in. And I think it's important that I think it's important that we do have these common themes, because this is part of what brings us together as a community, is that we have these kind of underlying common themes. I mean, that being said, your politics may be completely different from someone who answered that same question in that same way, right? But we both know that there's something we enjoy about being bonded through the community that a university can provide, and what it provides to a town.
Yeah.
Right? Like universities provide so much to the towns and cities and areas that they're in, and I mean, you can't find that everywhere. Like, I couldn't live in a town this size anywhere in Idaho and have exposure to the same types of cultural events and things of that nature, right?
Right, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it's not that you're unoriginal. I think
no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to identify what is important to them, and understanding where they can find that and where they can't find it, and that will direct a little bit what you're going to be doing with your career decision.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if people want to live in a very rural situation, they're not going to have access to maybe the same type of standard of living. That might be changing a little bit since COVID and remote work, but it still hasn't. It's not there quite yet. It's changed for a certain class of work, not all work. So
yeah,
for
sure.
I think it's an important thing to kind of point out. So you were saying, though, that you did not grow up in a place like this. So we can kind of go back now. Where did you grow up?
I've been trying to come up with a short version of this most of my life. I was born in Texas. I left the country when I was 7, and so I mostly grew up in England and the Netherlands because of my dad's job, but then came back to the States for college and have moved around the country for jobs in graduate school.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, you had kind of grew up all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was always in American schools,
Right.
but I would say my formative years, 7 to 18, were in Europe. Yeah.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Dr. Erika Fulton. She's an assistant professor of psychology at Idaho State University. So, going back to when you were a child living overseas, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my gosh, it changed so much. I think I had dreams of doing things like being a singer or a dancer, or, famous athlete. A lot of things that were affected by what I saw on TV, right?
Sure.
And then some weird things. Well, I mean, they're not weird professions, but I'm not sure where I got the idea that I might be like a forecaster, like a weather forecaster. But I think I just like to point to colorful things, and I don't know. It was weird.
Could be good as a professor.
Yeah. I mean, who knew I'd be pointing at
very colorful PowerPoint.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess my dream came true. And then I probably got more inspired to do more realistic things for my talents and skill sets, But they were, it was like doctor, lawyer, like things that we all had heard of. And I don't know, I think that's pretty typical. Like if you like school and you're good at school, you start to think of those kinds of professions because, they're prestigious, they make money. And then there's TV shows like ER. I don't know if our younger listeners,
right.
But there's other Grey's Anatomy. Yeah, same idea. And you're like, it just looks so exciting and important, So wanted to do things like that. And then like Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer. That's also probably a throwback for most of listeners. Wanting to be an inspiring teacher. So I guess I'm kind of doing things that are like elements of my dreams. But yeah, I never actually wanted to be a professor.
Yeah. I was wondering if there was going to be any careers in there that were something we wouldn't think about, maybe having grown up in Europe a little bit, right? Was there anything you saw over there that doesn't really translate?
Well, so in Holland, so for people who don't know, a lot of, I think most people know maybe, tulips, right? A lot of tulips are grown in Holland. And I will admit, I never wanted to grow tulips professionally, but when you get to see the full tulip fields and all their grandeur, there's part of you that's like, how can I just be around that beauty all the time?
Wow.
Yeah. But no, I don't think I have. I don't know. Some people do still wear the wooden shoes. Didn't want to make wooden. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's also interesting is like that those kind of basic professions that we all think about are fairly universal, right? I mean, that's where a lot of our international students are coming here to be doctors along those lines. So, yeah, a lot of those kind of like those big kind of, the jobs we all think of, they translate everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I guess the tulip farmer might be a little bit more specific. But,
not a lot of openings anyway, I don't think.
Yeah, very few. So you'd said that at some point you kind of started to realize to start looking at jobs that are more in line with your skills. What were those skills and when did you start kind of identifying them and making that? Because I think don't know if I really started being able to identify my strengths and weaknesses until I think I'm doing it, like within the last year. But
Congrats.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you had that before you even kind of started thinking about going to college, when did that start for you, and what did that look like? How'd that manifest?
Yeah, so I remember in middle school and high school, we'd have to take these tests to figure out our strengths, and but it was partly based on your aptitude and partly based on what you said you wanted to do. And mine would always come back that it would just be all over the place. It could be like, you could be a farmer or a doctor or whatever. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. And I think probably in high school is when I was like, okay, I'm pretty good in all my subjects, but I seem to have maybe more of an aptitude and interest in sciences. And so that combined with seeing shows like ER, I was like, maybe I'll go to med school. I think a common thing for high schoolers who are good at science, right? And so I started as a bio major in college, pre-med, hated it, but no offense to, my instructors, they were good, but I was like, we were doing genetic tests with flies. It was not my thing. Took a psychology course, decided I liked it, switched majors, started working in a cognitive psychology lab. And now it sounds like I'm going to say, and then I wanted to be a professor, but that's not how it happened at all. I got a summer job teaching in Cincinnati, like teaching some urban kids who, didn't necessarily go to the best schools. It was a summer enrichment program. Decided I liked that and was pretty good at that. So I actually spent like 10 years working in K-12 education because I thought that was where I fit. And then at the end of that 10 years, realized like I kind of wanted to go back to do psychology.
So did you come out of an undergrad with like a bachelor's in psychology?
It was a bachelor's in psychology with a focus on biopsychology because I didn't want to let go of my science roots. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you already have that too. It's like, why let that go to waste, I guess, for lack of a better.
Yeah, and I was still hung up, we get these ideas, we don't always know where they come from. Like I was still hung up on like science is like my thing. And so I stuck to the most natural science end of psychology.
Yeah. Similarly, I started as a bio major and kind of had more romantic visions, I think, of what it might look like. And at one point decided that it wasn't quite for me. Took a class that really excited me, a sociology class. It kind of blew my mind in some different directions. Having like grown up in a small town of Idaho, never being exposed to some of these concepts, right? So changed to social science. And I mean, I think what you were saying is like holding on to that thing of science. I've always kind of held on to parts, like I've found ways to integrate my love and connection to science, I think, into my life, even though I'm no longer really working in science. Like I still am very interested in science. I still love talking to people who conduct research. I love reading about science. I love reading about new research, right? And so like, kind of like, I think that this is a problem that a lot of people have, is that, like, oh, this is part of me. Like, I can't give this up for this other job. Like, there's this job that is going to check a lot of boxes that I need in my life, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's going to give me a steady paycheck, insurance, the time off that I need to be with my family. But, I just want to hold on to this thing that is so integral to me. So figuring out how to kind of keep some of those things, I think is doable more than people realize. Yeah,
because an interest doesn't have to be a profession. It can become a hobby, and it doesn't even have to be a full-blown hobby, right? Like, I mean, you might not identify as like a really, really big reader. Like reading might not be one of your main hobbies, but that doesn't mean that, taking a class in college that's not part of your major or career can't be something that piques your interest, that then makes you gravitate towards reading those things on occasion, right? We sort of take all that for granted. But I mean, my nephew, he's a sophomore in college, and like a lot of young boys who like soccer, think maybe I'll be a professional soccer player someday. And, it was tough, but he eventually had to learn that maybe he wasn't quite good enough. And that didn't mean he never should play soccer again, right? Sure. You just have to sort of reinvent that niche for yourself. Right. Like, will I play intramural? Will it be a hobby? So,
right. Yeah. Where does it apply to my life? Right.
Yeah. Or it's just reminded me how important exercise is. I feel good when I'm doing it,
Yeah. Exactly. So you were saying that you spent, after you got your bachelor's in psychology, you spent quite 10 years almost working in K-12. So I know that you did Teach for America, right? Did you do that before or like in the middle of that process? Or?
So Teach for America was the first job post-bachelor's that I had.
Okay.
Yeah, so because of the summer jobs in college that I did that were education-related, I applied to other education-related things, but because I wasn't an education major and I wasn't certified, I knew I couldn't just, roll up on a public school and be like, And I'd heard about the program. They were advertising heavily on my campus. Applied, got in, got sent to Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Oh, cool.
And was working middle school special education for 2 years.
Awesome.
And that's actually where I got the idea to do metacognition.
Oh.
So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to stay in education or not. I ended up staying for a while because once you know how to do something, people tend to hire you to do that,
Right. Yeah.
But that's where I think the seed got planted, because I kept thinking about my students, which is not the metacog, but wondering what was going on in their heads when they were struggling to learn the things I was trying to teach them. So, yeah.
Wow. So that was almost like serendipitously opened a door that you weren't even going to pursue for another 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was sort of always in the back of my head, but I was like, well, I don't know if I want to go to graduate school yet. This was also like back when the internet wasn't as developed, and so you couldn't you couldn't look stuff up as easily, So I just kept doing mostly other education-related jobs. I did like kind of a research one, but it was like a youth development research one. But I ran an after-school program, like a large after-school program. I was like principal of after-school.
Oh, yeah.
And then I even did some professional development for the Princeton Review, things like that. And then, that, I guess, the interest in Metacog, and more specifically, like an interest in doing a job where I felt like my intellectual needs would be better met. That's really what eventually propelled me to go, okay, I need to go to graduate school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, you were doing that whole time what we were just talking about. You were kind of just figuring out ways, even though you were working in K-12, you're figuring out ways to integrate your interests along the way. I mean, not only just as hobbies, but maybe as like a little bit of extra work, but it really gave you satisfaction to kind of be, like flexing your intellectual muscles in a different way and kind of following some things that really interest you.
Yeah.
When you made that decision, I mean, that was a long time to be working. Was that a pretty difficult decision and transition to make?
It's funny. I mean, I guess that should be an easier question than it feels right now. Because I had a lot of other friends who maybe took a year or two off after college and then went to graduate school. But for them, it seemed like it was either because they really knew what they wanted to do, or, and I heard this a lot, well, if I don't do it now, I might not do it, which I don't think is a good reason to go to graduate school necessarily. So I think for me, I was just undecided. But you're right. I did keep trying to find a way to meet the needs. So at first it was like, okay, well, I think I want to do research. And then I did a job that involved research, but didn't love it. And I was like, well, maybe I do want to go. Maybe I don't want to go back to the classroom, but I want to be involved. So that's why I tried the principal of after school. And then I was like, I've worked for nonprofits this whole time. I wonder what for-profits like, Tried that, didn't like that. I knew that I had these intellectual needs that weren't being met, but I was like, well, I'll just read on the side. And I just read a bunch. And then I was like, but that's not enough because no one's challenged me on this. I could do a book. I even tried a book club and I was like, So you're right. And then I was just like, okay, I think I figured it out now. But it was scary because it was like, most people doing what the type of grad school that I was going to do, were a lot younger than I was. Right. And so that was weird. And to be honest, my bachelor's grades weren't the best. I didn't know if I would get into a good graduate school or any graduate school.
Yeah. Well, so that's a big step.
Yeah. But I did it by not committing to the PhD right away. I did a terminal master's first. So I went a place where like you only applied to the master's program and that's all you could get. And then I had to apply to PhD programs and ended up going somewhere else. So that's how I managed it. But it means it's a much longer route, and it means that you're poor for a lot longer, and all your friends are 10 years younger, and pros and cons to all of that. Yeah.
Younger friends keep you younger.
Oh yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I guess like there's a lot in there that you went through. I guess for anyone out there who's listening, whether they're just starting out in their college experience, or maybe they've been in a job for 10 years and are trying to figure out how to find something that is more satisfying. Did you have any advice for our listeners?
For people who are undecided or haven't,
any of the above.
I guess it's easier said than done, but just dabble more. Just do informational interviews, right? So if there's a kind of job or profession you're thinking about, go talk to people who do that. Most people love to talk about themselves and their jobs, right? So usually people will sit down and just ask them all the kinds of things that, are harder to find on the internet. What do you really like about your job? Dislike? What recommendations do you have for someone who's considering this? And people will tell you all the ins and outs. And that can really help you decide, like, is that something I want to pursue? And then if you can volunteer, at least in the industry, there's a lot of jobs that, they're not going to let you be a volunteer surgeon, right? But volunteering in the setting, right? Because it's not just the work that you do, but where you do it. So if you hate being inside or you hate being outside, like those are things to experience before you commit to a profession. Take a class or two in that area. Just get exposure in any way you can. And then eventually there's still a bit of a leap of faith, right? You're not going to know if you want to be anything, right, until you're actually doing it. And then sometimes you're doing it and you like it for a while and then you don't like it, and don't be afraid to change. I think a lot of people are maybe afraid of the change or see it as a failure, right? But aren't they saying now that people are having multiple careers? That's the norm where it didn't used to be. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for stopping in, Erika.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
And that was our conversation with Dr. Erika Fulton. I love what we were talking about in regards to fulfilling parts of your life that aren't job related. And also how those can add up to finding what you are interested in and taking that leap when you get there. It does take a lot of courage, but it's usually quite worth it. If you're interested in informational interviews or anything else having to do with your career path, please visit the ISU Career Center website at isu.edu/career. Likewise, you can catch all of our past episodes of Pathways on kisu.org/pathways and on Spotify and YouTube. Likewise, we are on the air on KISU the second Wednesday of every month at 7:30. From all of us in the ISU Career Center and Pathways, I'm Mark Beaver, wishing you a fantastic rest of your day.